everyone. My name is Cheryl and I am the digital organiser at Australian Democracy Network, working on the Our Democracy campaign. A big welcome to everybody joining us tonight. It's so great to see all of you. There's some familiar faces, there's some new names, so welcome to everyone here tonight. Let's begin by acknowledging that wherever we're calling from, we're joining from First Nations land and that sovereignty has never been ceded. I'm on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us tonight. Tonight, we are here to talk about democracy, and in doing so, I acknowledge that First Nations people have been governing on this land for time immemorial, and that under their governance, our land and our waters thrived. I also acknowledge that our democratic system has caused immense suffering and damage to First Nations people, culture and country, and that we cannot achieve a healthy Australian democracy without justice and self-determination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I'd like to invite you to say hello and share the country that you are calling from in the chat. And if you're unsure, Ray is going to kindly share a resource to help you find out what country you're calling from. So just pop in the chat where you're calling from, who you are. Love to hear from you. So a little bit of context. Welcome to Organising for Change. It is the second webinar of the Our Democracy Deep Dives webinar series. Tonight's event is hosted by the Our Democracy campaign, which is a nationwide movement of people and organisations who are speaking up for an end to corporate influence in our democracy. We're working towards a shared vision, a political system where our elected representatives reflect the values and the concerns of our communities, and where decision-making is balanced and fair, and people and the planet are at the heart of it. I do want to acknowledge that one of our brilliant guest speakers, Christine Wood, isn't able to join us tonight live due to the time difference with daylight savings. But we do, however, have a pre-recorded interview with her on this topic, so we're really excited to share that with you tonight as well, so that we can still hear from her and learn from her experiences in the US. So just a little bit of an agenda check. We'll be hearing from 3 guest speakers working in key democratic movements. I'll be facilitating this discussion based on some excellent questions that you've provided in the RSVP form. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. There were so many great questions to get that we can't get through all of them, but I've used as many as possible to help guide our discussion about people power. Another thing to note is that we love how engaged our community is, but whilst we are hearing from the guest speakers tonight, while they're talking, let's try and keep the chat focused on the content of the webinar and keep it to a minimum, as it can be a little bit distracting for people when the chat keeps popping up. We also have closed captions this evening, so they're enabled, and if you do require them tonight, you can turn them on via the Zoom settings at the bottom of your screen. If you're having any problems, just pop in the chat and then we can help you out. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our very impressive panel of guests tonight. So our first speaker is Christine Wood. She is the co-director for the Declaration for American Democracy, DFAD, which is an anti-oppression coalition working together to make the promise of democracy real for all Americans. Prior to this role, Christine served as the field director for the coalition, where she spearheaded grassroots organising to pass federal and state democracy legislation. A little fun fact for you all is DFAD is actually where the inspiration for the Our Democracy campaign comes from. Our second guest speaker is Dr. Sophie Scamps. She is the independent member for the federal electorate of Mackellar. Sophie made history this year at the election by becoming the first independent to win the Northern Beaches seat. And prior to that, she was a practicing GP as well as serving her community in the emergency department at Mona Vale Hospital. Another fun fact that I was delighted to find out about Sophie was that she was an elite athlete qualifying for the 1992 Olympics. And our third guest speaker is Anyo Geddes, who is the advisor and the projects manager for Sophie Scamps. She was the director of the Sophie Scamps Independent Election Campaign. She is a founder of Mackellar Rising and co-founder of the Voices of Mackellar group. Previously, she worked as Senior Engagement Advisor at World Vision Australia and Senior Change Management and Communications Consultant on projects both in Australasia, the UK and Europe. So we have a very impressive panel tonight. We know that Sophie and Anyo work really, really closely together, and we invited both of them so that we could hear the experiences of organising and building people power, both behind the scenes and what it's like to be the face of the campaign as well. So to kick things off, I would like to invite Sophie and then Anyo to say hello and then to share why they're drawn to working in the democracy space. Over to you, Sophie.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I'd like to acknowledge I'm coming from the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation and thank them for caring for our country and our coastline since time immemorial. Thank you so much as well to the Australian Democracy Network. You have been a great inspiration to us and still getting all sorts of wonderful advice from your network. So how did we get drawn to this? Well, Anyo and I, two mums living in the suburbs, realised that what was happening, how we were being represented just was no way nearly good enough, and that we, like the rest of our community, were just being taken for granted and we were cut out of our democracy. We couldn't be heard. I think I and Anyo, we both started from the climate aspect. We were concerned about what our future held, and then when the fires came, the Black Summer bushfires, what happened just very briefly was our representative at the federal level put out a survey when there was still smoke thick in the air from those bushfires, and we had to tick the box out of about 20 things of what issues were most important to us, and climate change did not appear on that list. And so it was like, right, we've got to act on this. Things need to change, and we knew that if we really wanted to try and genuinely represent this electorate, but at that stage we weren't running a campaign or anything, but we needed to start with listening. Our community needed to be heard, and that started with listening and sitting around kitchen tables just asking people what's important to you. Anyo, your go.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm also on Gadigal land and thank elders past, present and emerging. I think I've always been drawn to the democracy space, but my sort of call to action was largely cemented when I was living in the US under Obama and then Trump. And then I returned to Australia and I was just really struck by two main things. One was that over all the years that I'd been away, over decades, there'd just been a complete lack of progress, obviously on climate change, but also integrity, gender, equity, media ownership, regulation, corruption, all of these types of things. There just seemed to be no progress. But also I really could see a mirror of what I'd experienced in the US under Trump happening over here with the lies and the way the media were responding and the way the government was behaving. And it was just getting dangerously similar. So I guess Sophie and I felt like we'd waited a long time, we'd waited decades for leadership. And as Cathy McGowan says, if not us, then when, and if not now, then who? I think we realized that we just couldn't wait any longer, and it was up to us to find a way to increase democratic participation in our own community first, if we wanted to see some real change. So we stepped up.
Amazing. I love that quote. Sophie, you talked a little bit about, how you felt underrepresented, and you stepped up to that challenge. You made history by becoming the first independent elected to Mackellar. Can you share us a really brief timeline of, what happened from your perspective?
Well, I definitely didn't expect to be the candidate. What happened was when Anyo and I decided we need to start listening. So with some other women in the area who were having similar sort of thoughts, we started up the Voices of Mackellar, and that really was the start of just listening. So when we asked people what's important to you, the other thing we did was ask them what solutions would you like to see, and we had Zali Stegel next door as an independent. And people were coming up with the solution, well, we need an independent because we need to be genuinely represented. We're not being represented, they're just towing the party line. And now where is this independent? How do we join that cause? And there was no independent, and there was no sort of grassroots movement at that time. So in the end, Anyo and I decided to step aside from the Voices movement and started up that grassroots movement. And really, we were working on bringing people together. And really, there was many cups of coffee, wasn't there, Anyo? When we just had cup of coffee on all our days off. We were deciding who we would meet to, who we would chat with, and just building, and spreading the word. And another thing we were doing was, we knew that if we wanted a chance of winning against an incumbent that had been in for, the Liberal Party had been voted in for the last 73 years since the seat was created. If we wanted to win, we had to really run a professional campaign. So we started building that as well and looking for the candidate. And we had lots of people on our list. But really, people kept saying, we want somebody from within the community, would one of you two do it? And that's where we ended up. But yes, but it took a while for me to come there, because as I said, I didn't expect to be the candidate. But as Anyo did just quote Cathy McGowan, and one of the other things she used to say was, you've got to flex your courage muscle sometimes. If not you, then who? Just flex your courage. I was like, oh, okay, I'll do it. So it took me a while to come to it, but it's been fantastic.
Fantastic. And Anyo, you were instrumental in the success of that campaign. Can you share with us briefly the timeline of your involvement?
Yeah, well, we very much, in our case, it's a little bit different to some of the other electorates, in that we really did very much start this together and go along the whole journey together, as Sophie just said. So as Sophie said, we started by listening. I think it was just really crucial to, I think for the two of us and amongst our friends, we just weren't sure within our networks, are we in an echo chamber? So it was just crucial that we found a model that could work for listening and making sure that there were other people and enough people in our electorate who really weren't satisfied with their level of representation and wanted to see real change. So yeah, I think, as Sophie said, we started the Voices of Mackellar. That was just really fundamental to the foundation of the entire movement. And then I went on, well, as Sophie said, we created the foundations for a campaign, and Sophie was concentrating on that and learning how to sort of be a candidate at a certain stage, while I was sort of building a bit more the community side of things through Mackellar Rising. And Mackellar Rising, I had a lot of help from, learning from the Vote Tony Out group in Warringah, which Mark Kelly ran in a similar way. Mackellar Rising was a movement. We didn't take donations. It was all about, don't give us money, have the conversations. That's the currency. It's have those difficult conversations with your friends and neighbors and start talking. And yeah, so I think that was sort of my story, was that I was sort of doing Mackellar Rising, and then when Sophie decided that she would step up and be prepared to step up and take this huge leap out of her life as a doctor into the public sphere, which was incredibly brave, I then went on to help run the campaign.
Great, and what a leap that must have been, Sophie. So now we are going to hear from Christine about the work that DFED does to strengthen and protect democracy in the US. All right, so hi Christine, thank you so much for joining us today from the US. We'll jump straight in. So can you tell us a little bit about what Declaration for American Democracy's vision is and what your mission is?
Of course. So Declaration for American Democracy is a coalition of 250 plus organizations that are working to make the promise of American democracy real for all of us. So we are an anti-oppression coalition that believes in democratic systems, institutions, and that the leaders must reflect, represent, and respect the diverse multicultural nation that we are and always been. So, together, we believe that for our democracy to work for all of us, it must include all of us. So that's why we're supporting sweeping democracy reforms that would make that promise real. And what kind of role does people power play in achieving that vision for a democracy that is representative of what America actually looks like? Sure, and it's absolutely essential. So our goal as a coalition is to pass sweeping legislation to protect our freedom to vote, to get the influence of big and corporate and secret money out of politics, and to make sure that we have an ethical and responsive government. To do that, to pass legislation, we need to make our voices heard and ensure that every member of Congress, every senator possible is championing our issues and is willing to vote in support of our legislation and advocate for it. And that goes for the president as well. So the people really drive change here. We work a lot to walk folks through the process of making their voices heard through rallies, through meeting with their members of Congress, through organizing in their communities. And we definitely believe that for change to happen in Congress, it really needs to come from the bottom up, from everyday people standing up for what they believe in and calling on their representatives to get it done.
So we've just heard from Christine about how at the center of DFAT, it is the people who really drive change. So my first question to you, Sophie, is, I understand that you were elected off the back of a really big community-led campaign. So can you tell us about your experience of people power? How did people drive change in your campaign? Oh, you're just on mute still.
Sorry. Yep. Sorry. As Anyo mentioned, we really encourage people to just have conversations. It started with a conversation. It started with listening, and not just speaking at people. You need to do this. Very much listening. What's important to you? What would you like to see happen? What solutions? What ideas do you have? And as you do that, as you start listening, people become invigorated and energized, and really, that it's an act of bringing people back into their democracy and letting them know that this democracy belongs to you, and your voice is important and you deserve to be heard. And when we first started the kitchen table conversations, and you and I were just blown away, weren't we, about how absolutely excited people were and, exhilarated almost people were to just talk about what was important to them. They were so excited. And so that was self-activating in a way. And it just energized people. And the more we did it, the more people were saying, and so the solution really came from the people themselves. Like we kept saying, we didn't create the movement. We didn't create the change. We just tapped into it because people were already feeling it and experiencing it. And we just pulled people together and connected people and gave people permission to talk politics. I'm not sure what it's like in America, but in Australia, we know you don't talk religion, politics, money. Well, absolutely, we should talk politics because it affects our everyday lives. Don't call it politics. It's just, what's important to you. So really, it's just talking and connecting and listening.
Yeah, I love the way of framing it, of not talking about politics and, just sharing what's important to you, what are the issues that affect you, and what are the solutions that we can work together on. Anyo, you have helped to co-found Voices of Mackellar, and you and Sophie founded Mackellar Rising, which is a grassroots organisation working on a new way of doing politics. It's a community-led model of representation, as you've just outlined, Sophie, and it's based on consultation and transparency. So my question for you, Anyo, is how do you even, begin to build a movement like that? What are the kinds of things that you did with others to find other people who cared about democracy? I mean, you mentioned kitchen table conversations, but what else did you do to find other people who cared?
Well, I think just something, if there are people on this call who are considering, who want to sort of do something similar in their electorate, I think the most important piece of advice that I can give is just start. Begin. The only thing we know for sure is if you don't do it, it won't happen in your community. That's the only guarantee. So, these things are very organic. You really need to be open to rolling with the change. And in our case, as Sophie said, because we were looking to be community, run a community independent movement, it wasn't about putting our ideas, our values, or our policies on to other people. It was very much about asking people to participate by sharing their views and their values and their concerns. So just really to be brave enough to start those conversations. And as Sophie said, one of our key kind of goals was to make it okay to talk about politics, and it was really interesting. A lot of the disengaged people at those kitchen table conversations sort of said, the types of people who would normally say, I don't talk about politics, I don't do politics, I'm not into politics. And then we say, but what do you value? What do you care about most? What do you value about living in this community? And what are your issues and concerns? And then they slowly began to realize that if you care about anything, then you are political. You're already a political person. It's just that it's been stigmatized in a way that has taken, as Sophie said, taken the community and the voice out of politics, and we needed to put that back. In terms of recruiting others, I'd say to everybody on the call that, don't be afraid to begin with the people that you already know. I think that was sort of, when you can be overwhelmed by the idea of starting a movement or how to recruit new people, and that you have to go and sort of find 100 or 1,000 people that you've never met before, how on earth do you begin? The only way you can begin is with the people you already know and the networks you already have. But it's about framing the questions, about giving some shape and form to what you're trying to achieve. And so, as Sophie said, we used the voices model. We started by encouraging people that we already knew to host in their homes, but ideally invite 10 people that we don't know along. And that's the way that we grew, is that we could sort of expand our network, starting with the people that we did know, and then they use their own networks. And then we would encourage anyone that participated to host another one in their home, and then they would invite 10 people that they know that we don't know. And we'd continue to have those conversations, and that's how it grew for us. And I think it's also really important in this situation, when you're trying to get people involved, rather than focusing on the negatives and the things that divide us as a country or as people, it's most important to actually begin by trying to find find out what people have in common. What we're trying to do by building a community is bring people together. So talking about divisive things can be very difficult. And one of the key rules in our kitchen tables conversations was that every single person had an opportunity to speak, and it wasn't a debate. It was active listening. So not only, it wasn't just Sophie and I who were actively listening to what friends and neighbours and other people at the table had to say, but they sort of switched a gear where, rather than kind of coming to debate and knock other people down about what they feel or what they think, they were forced to sit and listen and actually be open to difference and accept each other's differences, but particularly to find common ground. In most cases, there was more common ground than there was difference. And then secondly, the only other thing I'd say with volunteering, like encouraging people to be volunteering and giving their time, we certainly learned that through our own personal experience as well, that, rather than sort of sitting at home feeling depressed or, throwing things at the television, that active hope was a sort of a phrase that was coined in our campaign, where people had been feeling frustrated, they hadn't been sharing it, they didn't know what to do with those frustrations. But once we gave them something to do, they actually turned that into active hope and felt inspired and had hope for the future. So I think if you're bringing volunteers into your movement, if you're wanting to band people together, it's really important to start by developing, having some values. So it was really important to us, like I said before, that we're about listening. We're not about judging, not about debating what other people might think or believe or be concerned about. It's a very respectful process, and it's a very positive process. So, always very polite and respectful. And I think it's really important to also start sort of having a bit of a plan about your messaging and the phases that you're going to be going through if you want people to come and join, because they'll be giving their time. And people, one of the key things that sort of I think keeps people away from participating is just that everybody is so time poor. So it's kind of creating situations that are manageable for people to participate in as well.
Absolutely. And you're so right about, starting and beginning is the hardest first step. It only gets easier from there. And there was also a perfect segue, as in when you talked about the common values and finding common ground, because we know that democracy is about broad participation, and that movement building means working with all kinds of different people. But we don't always agree on everything. And in fact, most of the time we don't. So my question to you, Sophie, is how do you engage with people who have like vastly different opinions and values to yourself? And can you give us some examples of when you've had to do this?
Look, I think I had a lot of good, it again comes down to listening and paying that respect to hear people, hear what they have to say, because quite often, you, as Anyo said, we do have you bring it down until you do find a commonality, and usually it comes down to something, well, I'm worried about the future, or something like that, or I'm worried about my family. Yeah, well, we're all worried about our children. So you can find that commonality. And I think that it's really important to pay people that respect of listening and hearing what they have to say. People want their voices heard, and that's very much became the catch cry of our community campaign. You know, if you want your voice heard, you know, we're listening, you know, because we hadn't been listened to. We'd been cut out and shut out for so long. The other thing I'll just say, add to what Anyo said, I think was really important, is when Anyo was saying that if you want something to happen, you need to start it. And I would just say is that I think I had waited 10 years, you know, before I decided to do anything. And when I did, and I had thought for so long, and I talked to people about, I've got this great idea, we should do this. How about we do this? I really think we should do something like this. And everyone would say, yeah, that's a great idea, great. And it would go nowhere because I was waiting for somebody else to lead it. And then finally, it kind of dawned on me just one day randomly, oh, Sophie, that's ridiculous. What are you waiting for? That person, you need to lead this. So don't waste your time looking around. That person that's going to lead this is you. If you've got that passion and that drive, it's absolutely you. And as soon as I changed, you know, that rhetoric from we really should do this to this is what I'm doing, then people's response was completely different. They said, well, how can I help you? You know, what can I do to help? So it was a completely different response. And so, yeah, it's up to you guys.
Thanks, Sophie. I just wanted to add on that, you know, in a lot of the questions that were submitted by our community, several people, you know, commented on that feeling about, you know, people don't care enough about democracy, people don't care enough about politics, and that as Australians we're just apathetic. And is that your experience of politics? And how did you overcome that disenfranchisement in our country that we often see?
I'll just say something quickly. Sorry, I keep harping on, but it was so simple. And I said this in my first speech. It was listening. The superpower was listening. And I think that, and as I said, Anyo and I, we would sit in those kitchen table conversations and just watch people become exhilarated, you know. So it is incredible. People do feel cut out and shut out, and do feel, if you feel like you're not listened to, then of course you switch off. And we particularly found that with young people. You know, young people are just striving to be desperately heard. It's their futures that are being created, and they were just being patronized and told to go away and go back to school. And so one of the things we really wanted to do in our campaign was connect with young people and let them know that yes, they absolutely deserve to be heard too, which is why we went out and did things like have a concert. Anyo arranged this most magnificent concert with all these local young artists, which was incredible. And honestly, I still get teenagers coming up wanting selfies. It's crazy. Plus the little kids, the little kids. We made it so look, this is what, you know, really excites me is I get so many little kids who are aged 4 and 5 and up to teenagers in school, you know, leaving school, wanting photos. And I just think, how incredible is that? Like that these young people want a photo with a politician. So we made it approachable, we made it real, and we listened to them and just said, we've got your backs on this. It's not because, you know, it's just because it purely came down to, oh my goodness, what a relief. Someone is finally listening to us.
Oh, yeah, Sophie, you're making politics cool for young people.
And making it fun. I think that's really something that we learned from watching the Warringah Zali campaign happening next door to us. You know, they were having so much fun. you know, we would see them in the streets, we'd see them waving banners, and everyone looked like they were having a ball, and they were having a ball. And you know that for sure, because in the Warringah campaign, the first time they had, you know, they ended up with, you know, thousands of volunteers. By the time the next campaign came around, all those volunteers came back and were ready to do it all over again. They had, you know, they missed it, because there's so much camaraderie. And I think it can feel as though you may be, you know, the only one and quite isolated in your community. And one of the most beautiful things about the experience that they had in Warringah and the experience that we had in Mackellar is that people bonded and made new friends, new networks, and realized that actually there are many like-minded people. They just didn't know how to find each other, and they just needed a channel for their voice.
Exactly, they're still meeting up.
They're still meeting up.
Yeah, so often we come, you know, a lot of people volunteer their time for the cause, but they end up staying for the connection and the friends and the community that they build around them. And a question that came up time and time again from our community was about keeping people engaged and keeping people motivated in the long term. So how do you do this? How do you keep people engaged? How do you keep people motivated? And, you know, looking forward, what are your plans on building participation in local democracy beyond the election?
Yeah, so this is huge for us. I think that, you know, it's been, for us, having come up through the community movement, we already had so many things in place. The usual things, there's a huge toolbox of things that you can use, and so many of them are available in a lot of, you know, a lot of people have written books. Kathy McGowan and Ruth McGowan have written great books, and many others are writing books again now that are coming out at the moment, including the Voices group in Indi, with lots of great ideas about engagement. There's also a library called the Commons Library that has a lot of really great information for people that are wanting to community organise, and also, of course, the Community Independent Project, where we're developing a really, really clear toolkit for people that they can use, learning from Sophie's campaign, but also many of the other independent campaigns. So the sorts of things that we did in the campaign, for those who may not know, we began certainly through Voices and through Mackellar Rising by using the free tools that are now available. You know, technology has actually contributed hugely to our ability to achieve what we achieved. The fact that we can connect on social media now, the fact that we can send an online newsletter. I mean, we actually built our movement during COVID. So, you know, if we could do it then people could definitely do it now. And yeah, so definitely lots of tools like social media and regular newsletters, lots of events. And I think it's really important for people to also have events around your democracy. So, you know, it may, rather than a poster or an event that says, you know, well, let's talk about all, you know, the problems with integrity, all the terrible things that are happening, maybe try to find local artists or a speaker who can sort of talk about an issue that is related. So that draws people to the event, or maybe a local or an author. And then when you're there, you can start to let the audience ask the questions that bring you to those more meaty questions and those more serious topics. But it's about bringing people together. So in the campaign, we did a lot of sign waving. You know, a lot of people were really surprised that people were very keen to do door knocking, to stand on the side of the street in the rain at 6 a.m, waving signs like crazy people. And we certainly heard, of course, also at the polling booth that some people who were quite disengaged said, you know, if that many crazy people, you know, are prepared to stand on the side of the street every Monday or whatever, there must be something going on here that I should pay attention to. And that really made a huge difference. In terms of keeping people motivated, we've been lucky to bring a wonderful volunteer base along with us. And we're currently doing our first big activation in the community. We're doing a community survey, so much more listening. We really need to get an update on what the big issues and what everybody's issues and concerns are. But rather than just sending the survey, we're asking our volunteers to go out in their t-shirts again and speak to people in the street, stand on street corners, and Sophie will be on street corners talking to people, also in shopping centres and things like that. But ultimately, in the end, we'd love to develop reference groups and sort of citizens' assemblies and the wonderful things that can really bring people more actively into policy at the policy level. And the last thing I'll say is also that there's a big difference between a community independent, in my experience, than a party MP in that, you know, we have our office is full of volunteers. Our door is open. We welcome, you know, the skills and the ideas and the thoughts and the time that people are prepared to come and participate in their democracy by working in the electorate office or you know, helping us with our various activations. And, you know, I think that really helps for everybody in the community to really participate in their local electorate office. It's an open door. So if you have an independent in your area, go and knock on the door and walk in.
Yeah,
it's open.
And so much of what you and Sophie both said comes down to actually deep listening. And it reminds me of this quote that someone told me once, is that, you know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we speak.
Absolutely.
Right.
So we've had some really great Australian perspectives about movement building from you, Sophie and Anyo. I'm now really excited to share with you what Christine had to say about building people power at DFAD. When I did interview Christine for this segment, our chat actually went for way longer than I actually anticipated, because there was just so much to learn from her, especially given how DFAD's campaign mirrors ours in a way. We won't be able to play the whole interview here tonight, but in our follow-up email, we will send through the whole recording you'll be able to watch. But for the time being, Isab is going to share a snippet of it. And you talk about having a really strong and really broad base and intersectional coalition. But I imagine that, you know, when you started, it didn't look like that. So how did you build it from, you know, say a core group of people who are working on this issue to expand it to a really broad base and intersectional movement? Like, how did you form those alliances?
Sure. A lot of outreach and relationship building. So as I mentioned, you know, all of the issues that we're working on connects to democracy. So we've had a lot of luck, or a lot of growth for the environmental community, for example, is because we had conversations with folks that work on those issues who absolutely understands that in order for us to combat climate change, we need to get big money out of politics. And in order for us to confront and defeat environmental racism, we need to defeat voter suppression. So these organizations already understood in the environmental community and other communities why a functioning democracy is important. So just reaching out and letting folks know that this is a space where all of us can fight for this one thing, I think was really helpful. So we had to have a lot of kind of one-on-one conversations to bring folks into the fold, and then asking them to organize their own communities. So we have folks in our coalition that are leaders in the climate space who have really reached out to other folks in the climate space and brought them into the fold. So I think that's one, is reaching out to our networks, then asking them to reach out to their networks to grow, and identifying the intersection on where our issues align with theirs, and how fighting for our issues is fighting for their issues. So I think that's one. And then when it comes to just like meeting folks who are doing the work on the ground in places across the country, we went to a lot of those places and used our relationships to ask around, who should we be meeting with? Who might have a story that can outline and underscore the importance of what we're fighting for, or who's at the center of the movement in this community? So I think actually getting to know folks on the ground and meeting with as many people as possible, and then supporting those folks to lead has really helped with that as well.
And how, like, what specific actions or tactics did people in your movement use to make these reforms a priority for the senators?
Sure. So we did kind of an array of tactics, of kind of our tried and true tactics. So one, of course, is meeting with members of Congress. So we have an election, and then every time we're moving into a new Congress, we provide resources for activists to meet with their members and to urge them to support our legislation as an urgent priority. So we have a really big emphasis right after the election to meet with all of our members of Congress immediately and to train folks up to talk about these issues. If you have any good polling that shows how popular it is, that can always be persuasive to members of Congress. And also, getting people to share personal stories around why this matters. So that's the first thing is we always try to start off a new Congress strong by meeting with as many members as possible and asking them to support the legislation and then tracking them on that commitment. So that's one thing. Another thing that we've done is we've really cultivated our champions of democracy in the House and Senate. So inviting folks to speak on our activist calls, working with them to, maybe publish op-eds. So supporting their leadership on this has been helpful because it shows them when they hop on a call and they see X amount of people on it, it energizes them, it encourages them to really lean in and talk about it and shows them how much people care about the issue. And then another thing is holding events nationwide. So that helps both with the media and also helps with building community in communities across the country. I think folks coming together can be really powerful in building community, but also, like I said, inviting the press, getting press there, and then at least here, members of Congress, they read their local paper. They have, a Google notification where if their name is mentioned in the press, their comms person sees it and usually sends it to them. So during the Freedom Vote Act push, we really held a lot of events that generated positive press coverage so that members were hearing about this everywhere. They were hearing about it at their local office. They were seeing it on TV. They were hearing about it in the paper. They were getting calls to their offices as we ran a pretty good call campaign. We ran an LTE campaign. So really trying to make our voices heard in all of these different spaces. And then I think also being ready for rapid response moments has been helpful too. So if something big happens that connects to democracy, responding to that, getting media on it. If we can get a major publication, kind of even better. If you can kind of raise it to be like the national conversation for a day, that could be helpful too. So yeah, just a few strategies that we've done in the past.
Yeah, it sounds like they're all strategies that, anyone at different level of engagement and with different commitment levels can take part and engage with. I know that our community will be disappointed that you aren't able to join us live. How can I find out more about your campaign and support you from here?
Sure. Yes. Well, I'm excited to watch the event later. Thank you for offering to send me a recording so I can see everyone. I'm sorry I can't join in person, but really appreciate the invite to join. For folks who want to follow our journey, our Facebook is DFAD, D-F-A-D, coalition.org. And you can also follow us on Twitter at DFAD Coalition.
And my final question for you, Christine, is what is a last piece of advice for someone who's wanting to work in the democracy space and wanting to build a fair democracy? What would you say to them?
That's a really great question. I think how I would emphasize how important it is to be in community with other folks. That's something that has always been rewarding to me and has helped me recharge and has helped me stay hopeful is, I think a lot about civil rights activists in the 60s in the United States and how they've had to deal with kind of so much more than I have had to deal with in terms of the fight, and how people have been fighting for, hundreds of years for our democracy. And there was many setbacks before we passed in the United States the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act. So it's not always going to be like the winning moment. There's going to be setbacks, but that's why being in community with folks is so important because they're what recharges all of us, and having that support system, I think, is really important and inspiring each other and ourselves to keep fighting because the win will happen, even if it's a longer arc than you think, and you can meet some really amazing people on the way that are just as passionate as you, and that can form really amazing friendships too.
Yeah, you're so right about having a community around you. I mean, like, so many people come for the cause, but they stay for the people that they meet and the communities that they're part of, right?
Sure. And it's okay if it's an online community. If you're in a rural area, that's fine. And you don't have a ton of folks around. You know, first off, I met a lot of great folks that had rallies with 7 people that got awesome press coverage, and that was really amazing for them. So that's awesome. But also, if you don't have anyone around, join the online community. That's fine too. I've met a lot of good friends online.
Amazing. I think, yeah, community is everything. That's what recharges us. That's what keeps us engaged. Anyo and Sophie, was there anything that stood out from you about what Christine said?
Sophie, on mute.
I just was struck by how similar their experience is, and how it's human nature. How do you build? How do you're just reaching out, you're just talking, you're just being friendly and approachable, and how do you continue it? I think the really important thing, as Anyo said, is fun. The people who were volunteers on our campaigns, you know, a lot of them still catch up and have friends, and because they did make wonderful connections, and are desperate to help. You know, they were almost disappointed when the campaign was finished, because even though they were exhausted, they wanted it to keep going because it was so exciting. And when we very first started this, Anyo and I were sort of working in the sustainability and on climate change. And one thing we realised was just how good it feels to actually start acting. When you finally take that step to start acting, it's just like a relief. I still remember the very first thing I did, which was put a poster up on a road near us with the kids, and I just saw how excited they were to be doing something and how good we all felt. And we ended up coming up with this saying, you know, action brings hope and acting together brings change. And I can just sort of see that's where the power is. The power is in making those connections. When they were saying that, you know, asking who should we meet next, who should we meet next, we were exactly like that. And we would like meet someone and say, well, we would love to meet other people. Who else can we meet? And that's just how it grew and grew. It was, yeah, very similar experience.
Definitely, yeah, 100%. And I think one thing, I'm not 100% sure if it's the same in the American system. She was talking about obviously meeting with congressmen and things like that, and congresspeople, I guess it is now. But something that is something that we've really learned, and that Sophie's doing an amazing job of, and all the other independents, is that there is a much more direct line to really speak up. So, you know, if people in our communities take the time to write in and make it clear and make that connection with Sophie to tell her that they'd like something said in Parliament, there is time for Sophie to you know, air their voice in Parliament, to be their spokesperson. We didn't see as much of that with our previous incumbent, but it's something that we really encourage, and I think that is very empowering for people. And also, you know, writing in, as a lot of the organising that you do, writing in, putting submissions in, the fact that those voices really count. If 5 people put a submission in, nothing's going to happen. If 200 people put a submission in, there's something going on. You know, it's really important to participate, and I think what we're all trying to do at the Australian Democracy Network, but also amongst the independents, is open those doors and create those avenues for that participation. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I love that quote. Action brings hope, and acting together brings change. I've certainly found that, you know, when I've felt most anxious and most paralyzed by, you know, the climate crisis or, you know, environmental degradation, is that when I've actually stepped up and taken action and volunteered, or, you know, gone out and done some weeding with my community group, like, that's when I've felt most empowered, and when I've felt, you know, where change and hope is possible. So thank you.
And And I'll just say one thing just to add to that, because I think it's so important, is when I first had my own little moment and thought I need to do something, it wasn't, it certainly was not, I need to run for federal politics and be a federal parliamentarian. It was, I need to make changes in my own life. I need to start making sure we're composting. I need to, I need to teach my children, and so it very much started with me. What can I do? And then I also realized that, that awful sense of helplessness that I was feeling as one single person, many other people were feeling, like just those conversations I'd had on, with friends like Anyo. I mean, this is why we were friends talking about this type of thing, and just were able to share that with each other. And on the sidelines, when we had the bushfires, I knew that people were feeling horrified, but what can I do to do that? So just know that even it just kept snowballing. And even if you start with the smallest step, it's that start that counts, just that step and that intention to do what you can. And if it's something small, that's absolutely fantastic. And if it ends up as something big, then that's also fantastic. But you just, it just sort of, I think things just play out sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much value in knowing that you're not alone, and to be connected with other people who share those values and share those same anxieties as you. It's been amazing to hear from, you, Anyo, and Christine, about how you and your communities have been drivers of democratic change. And, hearing these perspectives, it really reminds me of the huge role that people power plays in our campaign for a healthy democracy. Before the election, we had this huge integrity survey, and hundreds of people across the country letterboxed flyers. They went to, had stalls set up at markets. We had, after the survey was finished, we had people all across Australia delivering the survey results to their MPs. And just recently, we had 320 people write submissions to JSCAM about capping electoral spending. And right now, it feels like a really monumental moment, because we're seeing real movement in important integrity reforms. We've got the National Anti-Corruption Commission, and this has all been possible because of community effort. But we know that to win the reforms in our framework for a fair democracy, it is going to take all of us working together. And next year, we are planning a really big year of people power. So to our audience that's watching tonight, if you're keen to get involved, we're going to share a link with you where you can express an interest in volunteering, and just pop your details in. Ray is going to share it with you. And this has been the second webinar of the Deep Dive series, where each month we do unpack key reforms and issues in our campaign, and we create a space for our community to connect with each other and with experts. And I do want to invite you to the next webinar, which is on the 16th of November, where we have a really interesting deep dive with Tim Hollow, who is the author of a new book called Living Democracy. We're going to be discussing some questions that we couldn't get around to answering tonight that I know the audience asked. We'll be talking about, whether democracy as we know it is capable of addressing the environmental, the social and political and racial issues that we face, and what kind of alternatives, like ones that you've spoken about today, Sophie and Anyo, what kind of alternatives are there, and how can we begin to embed those principles in our day-to-day lives? And it's going to be a really interesting webinar. So Ray is also going to share a link to that below the volunteer expression of interest form. Would love to see you there. And just to wrap up our evening, I'd like to throw it to Anyo and Sophie to share one last piece of advice for anyone out there who's watching who wants to be part of building a movement for a fair democracy. What would that last piece of advice be?
You going, Anyo?
My piece of advice would be, every little bit counts. You cannot underestimate how valuable it is if for someone to reach, in our experience, for someone to reach out to us and say, I have 1 hour on a Monday between 4 and 5 that I can give you every week, or I have, a couple of hours across the week, or I have a full day that I can give you on a Saturday, but I can't help any other time. Knowing that you've got those resources, I guarantee that if you're shy and you're not someone who wants to be standing standing on the side of the road or not door knocking or walking up to strangers in public, that's okay, because there's so many things and so many different ways that people can contribute to movements and groups and democracy, that, you know, please put yourself out there and in the way that you're comfortable with. And, you know, as long as you just tell people what your boundaries are or what your skills are, they'll find a use for it, I promise. So yeah, just don't hold back, no matter, you know, how you feel. It's well worth stepping out onto the road.
Yeah, well, Anyo mentioned two things there: comfort zone and boundaries. And I just will say that one thing I really realised is Cathy McGowan's you know, adage, always saying just flex that courage muscle, is so important, because there's so many reasons not to take this first step or not to do something. I just will share this with you because I had a horror of public speaking. I wouldn't even ask a question in an audience in a session like this. Say this was live, I wouldn't ask a question. I just disliked public speaking completely. And so one of the things I had to overcome was, okay, there's going to be a lot of public speaking in this, Sophie, you're going to have to get used to it. But I had enough experience in my life. I used to be an athlete, knowing that you get used to things, and being a doctor as well, as things that you find really difficult, really uncomfortable, soon become part of your comfort zone. So you have to be willing to flex that courage muscle, step out of your comfort zone, and take that risk. And now look, with this, I'm totally fine with public speaking now. I love it. So it's one of those things I would never have done it. But if you just allow yourself to feel the discomfort and do it anyway, sometimes it's incredible, and how much, you know, something like I now enjoy public speaking. So yeah, I think that's okay. It's okay to do things that you feel uncomfortable with.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm definitely in the same boat as you, Sophie. I'm not someone who's public speaking comes naturally, but here I am interviewing you two. We're wrapping up a couple minutes early, so I'd love for everyone just to pop in the chat something that they got out of the session, this webinar tonight, and a big thank you to Sophie and Anyo for joining us.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Pop into the chat something that you got out of tonight before you leave.
Oh, that's nice. Hope, join, respect,
exhilaration,
Toastmasters.
Interesting.
Yeah. I didn't do it. I should have done Toastmasters. I kept saying, oh, if only I'd done Toastmasters or something.
Flex that courage muscle.
We are all only human. Love that. And listening. Ask who we should meet with. Act.
I think it's really important that action brings hope, because that lack of
yes,
hope.
Yes, go Groom. I can see Groom there. Sorry.
Well, that's right. But it's so debilitating when you don't feel hopeful, and when you start to act, just growing that hope, and that attracts more people to what you're doing as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just remember, I see the comment from Groom here, certainly in Warringah, Mackellar, you know, Wentworth, Goldstein, all of these areas that now have independence, they did not start, it was not easy. You know, we did not start, we started as safe seats where every second person said, it's impossible to change things around here. You know, so don't be disheartened by that. Absolutely get out there and start talking to people about how things can really change, because it happens, it's possible.
And even just a national, like it was a federal election, and people would say to us, oh my goodness, you're not getting the national coverage that you need. I say, it doesn't matter what is happening nationally. The people here locally, this is where it's happening, and this is where it counts. It was almost like local media was far more important than the national media.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the other thing I'll say as well is that we realised we were following very closely on what had happened historically in Warringah. So they had an independent run the term before Zali got in, who had achieved, I think, 10 or 12% of the vote. We had that happen for us in our electorate in Mackellar, when Zali got in the 2019 election, we had an independent that got 12%. So that kind of, you know, as Grim said, we're restarting, you build that mindset, the capability, the capacity, and continue having those cups of coffee and making those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And also what you said before about outsourcing the solutions from the community, because we do have those solutions, we do have those ideas. All right, so I think we are about time. Thank you so much for joining us, Anyo and Sophie, and thank you to Christine, who wasn't able to join us tonight. Thanks to our community who has stuck around. We're excited to see you at the next deep dives. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.